So it's now winter time, and in the fall, well, in September, we were able to harvest our honey off of our 5 hives. We didn't get too much honey, but we did have, I think, 15 frames of capped honey, and so we saved our honey cappings, the cappings from the honey frames, and this is actually just all the cappings, and there is definitely some nice honey in there that is still on the bottom of the wax capping. So we want to render the wax and save the honey if we're able to. So I'm going to try baking this disposable tray in the oven at a low temperature. I'm doing it at 170 Fahrenheit, and I'm going to put that in the oven and we're going to start melting it. I also have some burr comb, which is separate. That's just comb that was extra taken off various places in the hive. So because there's no honey mixed in with that comb or wax, I'm not going to treat that in the same way. I'm going to melt the cappings, and then we're going to stir it up and hopefully separate the honey from the wax. So I'm going to put that in the oven. All right, let's put the wax in the oven. Oven is now at temperature. It's at a nice low temperature, 170. I'm going to put that in there, and once it starts to melt, we're going to stir it up. Okay, so let's take it out to give it a stir. So keep in mind that whatever tools you use to do this process are probably not going to be reusable in your kitchen. So that's why I'm using a disposable foil tray, because the wax will not completely come out of it. I'm also going to use just a wooden skewer, but if you have a spoon, you can dedicate to this. Let's give it a stir so that we can get it mixing up, get that wax melting all the way into the middle. It's definitely coming along. All right, and the foil's actually not too hot, so we're going to just put that back in the oven. I think okay, so it's just been a few more minutes, and you can see that the wax is melting quite a bit more than it was previously. So I think the temperature increase to 200 Fahrenheit was a good idea. So we'll let that keep going for a few more minutes, and then we'll stir it up. So just be really careful when you're taking it out of the oven. As it starts to melt, it becomes really liquidy, and you don't want to spill hot wax on yourself, obviously. So you can see that this is definitely starting to melt nicely. So we're just going to give it a stir. Get all those wax particles mixed up to melt. And it looks pretty good. It's got such a nice color. So the idea here is that we melt the wax, and the wax separates from any of the remaining honey that were in the cappings, and then the wax will form a layer on the top. After we let it cool, we should end up with a hard layer of wax on top of any remaining honey, and then we can take off the wax and we'll reserve the honey for cooking or baking. It's not going to be a raw honey any longer since we have heated it up, but it's still going to be a delicious honey nonetheless. So I'm going to give this a little more time until we don't see any more chunks of wax in there. Once it's fully dissolved, then we will start the cooling process. Okay, so I turned the oven off. I just carefully took out the wax because it's very liquidy and hot, so just be really careful with that. There's still a lot of debris in here, and it looks to me like none of this other debris is going to melt now. So all the waxes now should have melted, should be on the top. Once this starts to cool, the wax should form a layer over the top. Any honey remaining will be left behind with the debris, and we'll separate that after it's all cooled. So let's start the cooling process, and then we'll separate the wax. Okay, so I have let the wax solidify on the top of this honey for probably half hour, 45 minutes. It is still warm on the bottom, but I think what I want to do is take the wax off while the honey is still warm, just so that the honey will drip off of the wax easier than if it's completely cooled. So what I could do is just bend the foil tray a little bit to pop the wax off the sides. You can see that honey underneath there. And if I try to lift that piece of wax, not sure even how thick it is. It's pretty thick. Oh, and you can see the nice honey under there. It's not a lot of honey, but don't want to waste any of it. So I'm going to take this piece of wax. I'm going to let the honey drip off of it. You can see all that debris underneath that we weren't able to melt. Looks like there's even some propolis there, and these are probably just bits of pollen or whatnot. So we're going to let that drip. Let the honey drip off of there a little bit. Actually, it looks like debris is starting to come off, so maybe I won't. I'm just going to put that into my pot now. This pot is a dedicated wax pot, so it's just an old pot that I got, and I'm going to reserve that just for melting wax. I'm not going to use it in the kitchen. So I'm going to pop off the other piece of this wax here. Oh, and that's why I'm doing this while it's warm, just so that it's easier for this honey to drip off. And again, there's lots of debris just going into my honey, so I guess I may end up just filtering this honey, but I'm going to put that into the pot for now. Okay, there's the honey that we're left with. Looks pretty good. It would have been completely clear had I not have dripped some of that debris into there. So I may just filter this and just to clear it up. But I'm going to use this and we'll put it into a different container to save. Okay, here's a better shot at the honey. So you can see how clear that honey is. Looks really good, except for that little bit of debris there, which I can filter out if I want. It's not a big deal. If you're just using it for baking or whatever, it's definitely not a big deal to get a little bit of pollen or propolis in your honey. And this wax here, we're going to move to the next step with. Okay, so I'm going to strain the honey now that I've captured out of the wax cappings. So as you can see here, we've got this honey. It looks pretty decent, but there are some finer particles in there that I want to try and get rid of. So I don't have any cheesecloth on hand, so I'm just going to try using a strainer. So this is just a kitchen strainer. It's a fine mesh strainer. I'm going to see if that will work. But first I'm going to heat up the honey a little bit just to make it a little more fluid. And I'm going to put it in the oven just in this tray. I'm going to put it in the oven at 250 Fahrenheit just for a few minutes to warm it up. And then we'll try filtering it and see if that works. Okay, it's been in there for a few minutes now. I'm just going to take it out and we'll see if it's warm enough. Looks pretty liquidy to me. I guess we could try it. Okay, well, it's working pretty good. So I'm just going to, my cupboard is in the way a little bit. I'm going to take a spatula and I'm going to try and get all of the honey out of the tray. Get it all into the sieve. So yeah, it looks like it was warm enough to go through the sieve quickly, and it looks like the sieve did take out some of those particles. Okay, so you can see that we collected some wax and some pollen and some debris in the colander and the sieve, and so that's good. That's what I wanted. And the rest of the honey looks nice and pretty, and we will probably got everything out of there that we're going to get out of there. So I'm just going to put that sieve aside to wash. And there's our honey. Looks pretty good. Nice and clear. So it looks like I've got just over 2 cups of honey there. So I'm going to get a jar and we'll transfer it to a jar. Okay, so I have this jar which I just finished. We had honey in here and we just finished it, so it does still have some honey residue in there, but I'm going to just reuse it right away. I think this only holds like 375 mils, so I probably have a little more than this jar, but let's see. So this honey is no longer considered a raw honey because it has been heated up. Oh, actually, it looks like it will fit. Maybe it is a 500 ml jar. It's like perfect. So again, it's not a raw honey because it's been heated, but it's been heated very minimally. So it's basically raw. About as closest to raw that you're gonna get after you're heating it a little bit. I'm just gonna get a spatula. And this honey I'm going to reserve for our own use here at home, and I'm going to use it for cooking or baking, or I'd like to also try fermenting some other foods like garlic in honey, so we're going to try that. So that's perfect. So roughly 2 cups of honey. There's the honey, 500 mils. Looks really good. So I'm going to let it cool before I put the lid on. So this 500 mils of honey that we recaptured from our wax cappings was only from about 15 frames, I believe. So we had 15 frames of honey this year. It was our first year of beekeeping. We had 5 hives, only 15 frames of honey that we took out of the hives. And so we did uncap the frames. We did let the frames drain of honey for quite some time in a colander, and let the cappings drain, and yet still there's still 2 cups of recaptured honey from the wax capping. So that's, I think, worthwhile to do this process to recapture that honey as well. And then of course we have the wax, and we will be dealing with that in the next step.